Welcome to the Painting Insights podcast. We have been working on something in the background.
That's right. We've actually started a Patreon channel. For the last couple of months, we've had previous guests revisit the channel to give us additional content, everything from studio tours, sketchbook tours, talking us through the process of paintings and all kinds of additional treats, which you're exclusively going to see as a patron who supports the channel.
So by supporting us on Patreon, you help the channel keep going. There's a lot of work put into this, from the video editing to the sourcing of guests. So you really help us find those guests and to put the content out.
And we have lots of content planned for the near future. So the links for that will be in the description of this video and in the description on the podcast channels. And otherwise, you can go on to Patreon and type in Painting Insights Podcast and support us that way. Thanks very much. Enjoy the video. Okay, hello, welcome to Painting Insights Podcast. This is the end of season 3, kind of wrap up, I suppose. It's the review of the season, and I'm thankfully joined by my wonderful co-host, Richard Blades. How are you doing, Richard?
I'm good, thank you, Simon. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. You've been busy.
Been extremely busy, yes, and haven't been able to be part of many of the interviews. Only a few this season, what with my own work, my own painting, teaching, running the gallery, and also going through a very prolonged, delayed and frustrating house move as well, which still hasn't happened but should do next week. So I've kind of been on the periphery of things, but Simon and I have been communicating in the background and looking for new things we're going to do in the next season. So yeah, I've been good, thanks.
Yeah,
how about you, Simon?
Yeah, good. Very busy, just like yourself. But we had the best of intentions to get Richard in as many episodes as possible. But it's just so much you've got to juggle at the moment that it wasn't possible. So when I would reach out about interviews, you'd have been already scheduled for something else. But that will be a constant thing where I'll try to get you on every episode that I can, and that is both of our intentions. But it's been a wonderful season, though. I've really enjoyed all of the guests that we've had. I thought we've had some amazing people and features this season. Yeah,
absolutely. And from an outside observer, in that sense, I've really seen you, Simon, as an interviewer, sort of, really sort of come into your own and develop those skills. And how many episodes, all together over the podcast series are there now?
I would say, well, I'm going to have to do some quick maths now. Let me think. To be 20, 60, 54, I think there's 54 interviews, I think.
So that's quite a lot. And, they often say with painting or with anything, it takes 10,000 hours to master something. It's not quite 10,000 hours, but I've really seen it, and I'm sure the audience agree as well. That Simon is used to this now and this format, and is asking some really, really good questions. And of course, each dynamic is different, isn't it? With each interviewee. But I've really enjoyed seeing that. So congratulations.
I appreciate that. That's very kind. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm learning a lot about not only art and art practices, but also about how to really try to extract more of the true essence of a person's what they find important, I suppose, about the art making, about themselves, and how they inject their own experience and what they care about into their art. And that's been very interesting for me, because there are certain questions that I'll always ask artists, but there's always unique questions to each individual. And I've been enjoying discovering those throughout each conversation I've had. So that's been wonderful. Really enjoyed it. Yeah.
And do you tend to, in that sense of, because I know you do the research and you look at the work and reach out to artists, and some you have a dialogue over time with, but do you tend to sort of react to each answer and look for things that you could pick up a thread on, or are you sort of going in with much more preconceived notions?
It's interesting, because when you say that, it did bring certain episodes to mind immediately. With Ken Nwadiobu, I thought I had several things from his history and art making where I thought I need to ask about the book, I need to ask about this exhibition that he had, I need to ask about this, this kind of collaboration that he has and these different concepts of how to exhibit his work. So those were quite planned, not planned, but preconceived, where I'd already done the research and thought, this is important to make sure that we cover all these topics. And yet I still had the opportunity to react to what he was saying. Whereas with someone like Kimball Geisler, I mean, these are literally the recent episodes, but with Kimball Geisler, he and I had been messaging since I think March of this year and sending each other voice messages saying, oh, it looks like I've missed you. Don't worry about it. We'll catch up later. And you're saying, I'm traveling across the country, but I will be able to meet with you if you want to do it that way. And so we felt as though we knew each other by the time we'd started recording. And I think that episode plays a lot more casually. It's why it runs over almost half an hour longer than it should have, because it was too easy to just chat with him like he's a buddy. And as much as I try to gain a rapport with every guest, some people you've already broken that barrier before you even see each other's face. So it does depend on the guest. But yeah, it's kind of a mixture of the two, I would say.
Mm. And do you find, because I know you've been painting a lot as well and really developing your own practice, do you find some of these interviews and some of the information and little insights you gain has kind of fed in not so much the work, but how you approach painting, how you approach your own practice?
Definitely. I mean, that more so, this may be wrong, I don't know, but more so than practice. I think practice is trying to put certain things into play, but I'm bad at having a plan before I go in. And I normally make a mark and react to that mark on the surface. And now I have a lot of the conversations I've had in my head to fuel the painting. And that's usually what drives a more creative session for me than if I'm just panicking and then just furiously trying to fix something I've done wrong. So I think the podcast is been more of I've utilized it more than I have my experience in painting, if that makes sense, because as much as I may experience painting physically, when I talk to guests, I feel as though I'm experiencing vicariously through them some of the actions and practices they're talking about, so that when I am then out in the field plein air painting, I have these insights, to use the name of the podcast, in my mind to really fuel the decision making, and that's really exciting for me whenever I'm there. And I love sharing the podcast with people who I meet because it's so useful for me, and I know that everyone who comes across it has really enjoyed it. So yeah, I absolutely love the interviews for that.
Yeah, and it's always an interesting thing that to understand the person behind the art, because many of us know these artists' work through Instagram, through Facebook, or wherever we see it, or even in galleries. But behind, that's just the manifestation of so many different things. And that's what the podcast is about, and was set up to be. That you look behind the work and see the journey, but also the how do I say this? The kind of particularities of each artist's journey and how they work and how they develop those ideas. And there's such a diverse range, that, especially I think in this season, from American landscape painters to abstract painters to Japanese figurative painters. It's a whole rich array and selection. So do you find that fascinating as well, just to see those different manifestations of the work and learn about those artists? And tell us about some of them that you've had on.
Oh, I do. I really do. And I've made a concerted effort to try and broaden the scope of who we're talking to, because I think that there are a lot of interesting artists out there. And I found it challenging but fascinating to speak to Itaru Shimomura, because there was the language barrier, him being Japanese, but it was so lovely having the interpreter there to speak between us and then to try and make this connection of where does the art come from? And I kept hitting up against this barrier of it's from empty, it's from an empty place. And as much as I understood that, there was part of me that thought, but what comes before the emptiness? You know, something happens in the subconscious to try and feed this. So that was wonderful. And then our last episode that people will have seen last week with CW Monday was an absolute treat, because that was a connection which took a long time. That was from Tad Retz, which was season one, Tad Retz. I think it was episode 3 or something like that. And he mentioned CW Monday then, and I followed up with him, and he was just so busy he couldn't make the connection. Then he came onto our Patreon channel, and we had a great Patreon video where he gave us a studio tour and showed us through lots of paintings and materials. And then afterwards, I spoke to him about CW Monday again, and he made the connection between us. So the fact that that's happened and I got to meet him was wonderful, because again, it's the difference between someone like Itaru, who feels, as much as he's not a young man, he feels very nervous about being on a podcast with so many great artists. And I was reassuring him that he's one of the people who make this so rich and vibrant in its kind of texture of different artists and experiences. And then you have CW Mundy, who knows that he's contributed into the art world for decades, for most of his life. So that's been incredibly enjoyable. And then we have, amazing young people like Nicholas Holman, who paints his own face as well as painting the canvas, which is just incredibly creative and very unique to him, I think, and made him stand out online. But every guest that we've had, because I don't want to leave anyone out, because every guest, even if they're not doing quirky, unique things, has really offered so much of themselves into the episode that it's not to be overlooked, even if it's not some unusual aspect of the person's character or online persona. It's still such a contribution to what we've been doing. So I've really have just absolutely loved it. Yeah.
I think what I find interesting about this podcast as well, and about yourself and myself, that our kind of taste in art is and painting is very varied and expansive. I mean, we like lots of different types of work, and there may be in some painting podcasts and some other platforms where it's narrowed in on a specific field or a specific way of working. Whereas this podcast has always been, I think in the beginning, there was maybe a leaning towards the more impressionistic plein air landscape painters, because that's, in many ways our sort of background and our peer group to some extent. But as it's evolved, so many different elements have come into it, which show, your knowledge of art and your range, your aesthetic range. And I think that is that interesting thing about it, that you can have abstraction next to, very highly refined landscapes, to figurative, to, much more esoteric forms of painting. And let it all come under this umbrella of painting and of art. And I think what we find is, though the art may be different and the personal journeys of the artist, there's a thread that goes through it all. And this is this passion and this drive to produce and to create and to share knowledge and insights.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I must say my education is being massively increased with each conversation. Mm-hmm. And I always like to say this is that when I first had you booked on my other podcast, Good Values, I was nervous because I'd been following you for a while. I loved your work, but it had dawned on me that I'd only really interviewed illustrators and filmmakers before I interviewed you. So I remember making a phone call saying, what if I can't ask the right questions? I don't know what to say to this guy who uses palette knives. What am I going to say? And I was nervous that we wouldn't be able to have a good conversation, which is amazing because I remember afterwards making another phone call saying it was perfect. It was so good. We got along so well and being so relieved that we have a common language. And even if I have such a limited knowledge about how you do what you do, I don't need to know. I need to let you tell us what you do and why you do it and how.
Definitely.
That was.
And I've had that experience over the podcast, and we go back to season 1 or 2. I can't remember, with Andrew Tischler, for example, something like that, where my style, and his style, they're worlds apart.
Yeah.
But there is this common experience of being an artist, of painting, of some of the struggles around inspiration, around work, around which educational path, or around the business aspect. So it's all of that kind of stuff. And do you find, in that sense, because you're going across the board in many ways, across the range of all of those different styles and ways of working, do you find that you're learning sort of new knowledge in that sense about it, but then translates over into the next interview? How do you find that?
Yeah, I've certainly learned that impressionist painters are far more particular. Well, not necessarily just impressionist, but the impressionist painters we've talked to are very particular about what color they use, and so would the Andrew Tischler school as well. Whereas back to Itaro Shimomura said he just buys blue, and he showed me 4 blues, and they're all different blues that he bought just to try and get the same blue. And he'll have a turquoise in there, and he'll have all kinds of different blues to try and just say, I just need a blue for this. And I think it was similar with Ken as well. I could be wrong, but yeah, it was less particular about the hue and about the opacity. It was just I just need this to be blocked in, this type of tone. And that I learned a lot from that, because I think part of the education is learning what is important about the palette and why people pick which colors they pick, but it was also understanding why people don't care about that, and it just won't factor into their decision making. And I know there's so much more to learn, so I'm excited for the guests for next season, which I've already started to book, and I'm excited about some of the ideas we have for next season as well, because it's, as much as we are going to remain consistent with our formats, and we're going to make sure that the interviews have a consistent quality to them and the same length and the same kind of delivery for the listeners and viewers, we're also playing with new ideas, which I think is quite exciting. So should we talk about that a little bit, maybe?
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, my schedule is absolutely crazy at the moment. I think when Simon first interviewed me, what was it? I can't remember when it was now.
I don't know. Maybe it was 2 years ago. I'm not sure. Maybe it was only.
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago. And at that time, I was doing little bits of teaching, but I was mainly just a painter and running it, my business in that sense, from my studio. And I had much more time, both time to reflect, but also time to share my voice and listen to other people. But within that 2 years, things have gone, quite crazy, and I've gone to having to produce more work for exhibitions, for galleries, and teaching more, but also opening and running a gallery as well. And often artists will choose one of those things, or people choose one of those things, but I've chosen 3 very high demanding roles to run simultaneously. So I haven't been able to be there for the interviews. Now, there maybe been some times where I could have squeezed it in, but I think if you notice in most of them that I've been in, like with everything, I like to give it my all and be very present, and I just haven't been able to do that. So what Simon and I have talked about, and I will be there for the occasional interview, is bringing another element into the podcast, where once a month we will have an episode that isn't, it's not going to take the place of an artist interview. It's going to be an extra where we talk for 1.5 hours, sometimes however long it goes, but really look at different subjects and topics around art and the art world. I've gained a lot of insights from opening a gallery. I've gone from being, an artist working with galleries to a gallerist as well. And along the way, I've met a lot of artists who would like to get into galleries and understand more about them, or want to know how they work, why they take certain amounts of commission. So I've gained a lot of that insight. And as always, I'm willing to share that and to help and to inform. So they're going to be some of the subjects and topics that we can broach on. But I thought as well that it could also be along the lines of subjects to do with art, to do with painting. I read and have been obsessively listen, I should say, to audio books a lot if I'm driving or painting. And I'm going through a lot of biographies of artists at the moment. And there's so much important and valuable information in there that can help us as artists. And I don't want these things to turn into some sort of self-help type thing, but it's just reflecting upon how we work as artists, those influences, how people have developed their ideas, and have a back and forth with Simon really about our own practice, how things are going, who we're inspired by, the pitfalls, the joys, and in a way sort of go back to that conversational style that we have in these end of season ones, but make it something a little bit more regular. And also maybe for some of them invite guests on that we could sit and talk, maybe other gallerists, maybe other artists, and look into art, painting from both the practicing artist point of view, but also in a wider scope as well.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I know that people are curious about how to approach galleries and what goes wrong and what to do if it goes right, but you're trying to retain this balance with the gallery. So it's just a wealth of knowledge to be shared, and
Yes.
the experience that you've been having, it'd be great to delve into some of that and have those conversations. Really exciting. I'm looking forward to playing with the format a little bit and seeing what we can do as far as structure for it as well. So yeah, next season's going to be a great season. But it's always a joy. I mean, this season has had so much great contributions from amazing artists from all over the world, and I'm excited about some of the people who I've already booked for next season, and one interview I've already recorded for next season. So I'm already off and rolling with it. A couple are hopefully going to be in person. I do fortunately get to visit a lot of artists in their studios with the gallery that I work with in North Wales, Finner Park. And a couple of those artists have asked to be on the podcast, and perhaps this new segment could be a way to introduce them if that's suitable for the conversation. But there's always going to be a nice way to try and add more to the to what you receive really for listening and viewing, because it's such a broad landscape of experience and knowledge to be shared that I just can't wait to keep packing it in there, because it's
Yeah,
just an amazing project so far.
yeah. And Simon and I are passionate about art. This is maybe obvious in how we talk and what we do. And that passion is out there too. So we're trying to connect in that way those passions, across the airwaves, as they would say. And I think with this new segment or section, that it be something that is flexible but open in the way that we approach things, and that we maybe look into things like inspiration more. What inspires artists, in a way of helping also. I've seen a lot and talked to a lot of artists, and again more so since the gallery has been open, about how they find style, how they put a portfolio together, all of these types of things. So maybe they can be things that we look at and invite people on to maybe talk about, even if it's a recorded little bit, for a 2-minute section that we bring people on just to talk. So that information, which in many ways it's been very opaque for many years. I wrote something on my gallery's website under the title Submissions, and it came from having so many emails and DMs. I want to be in your gallery. Here's a painting. Will you represent me? And things like that. To then people who did know what they were doing, and then it was a bit more of a consideration for me. But I tried to write down the information I was looking for 20 years. How you approach galleries, what galleries look for, how you go about it, how you communicate, how you get your work together, how you research a gallery, and all that kind of stuff. So for a lot of it, me now, that I'm in this position where I have this platform and have a gallery and I'm successful as an artist, I want to share that information that I spent a long time trying to find out but wasn't there.
It's interesting as well that before we start the recording, we have conversations, which I think this needs to be on a recording, because just before we started this, we were talking about the getting natural pigments from the earth, and how interesting that can be to do with the history of the country and the area, but also how it reacts on different surfaces. And we've both got different experiences to those that we can share, as well as what we were discussing about your routine, because I think that all contributes to your day and your mindset as an artist. These are all things that we can now plug into this new segment, which will probably have a kind of, a kind of sub-series name that will create for it. But at the moment, it's just the concept that we're going to start investing in, I think. And I can't wait to have segments with certain people in other episodes as well. Like you said, just short conversations where they just input their 2 cents about what we're talking about.
Oh, definitely. And so many artists are busy and stuff like that, but there are many who are willing to just come onto Zoom for 10 minutes, and then Simon is able to maybe splice that into the episode. But also, you were saying about the natural pigments as well, and to draw from art history and some of the artists that have inspired us, or others that really give us both a knowledge and understanding of who we are as painters. And I was just thinking, and I don't know why it come to mind though, of Joan Erdley, who was a Scottish painter. She died very young, but her work was so much about this sense of place, this sense of an artist within a landscape, of location, of almost that psychogeographic element of art. So it may be that we do a episode which is about location and place, and have artists talking about what it means to them, because it's been such a big thing throughout our history and today. Your surroundings, your area, your region, that you're inspired by. It's such a fascinating topic. So we have lots and lots to explore. And I think as well, by doing it once a month, we sort of store up all of this information and condense it into
yeah. I like the idea of inserting what we've learned from books, because I've recently been gifted a box full of art books. So I'm going to be combing through them, and I'm sure there'll be some tidbits in there which I'll write down and just think, I'll just put post-it notes in there to mark the page so that we can go through and talk about certain relevant, aspects of someone's experience or whatever the book is covering, because I think that could be really interesting to promote literature for listeners and viewers as well.
Definitely. There's so many good art books out there. I think for me, especially the biographies, and I'm going to one on Matisse at the moment, 23 hours long. Wow. But just knowing about these artists' life beyond, they had this exhibition then, or, they lived in the south of France for this period, and really relating to the struggles, but also that absolute hunger and the inspiration. So if we're able, we could maybe do little book reviews as well.
Yeah, I like the idea. I think that wouldn't hurt at all. Well, it's exciting stuff. And the next season should be back. And if I've worked it out right, I was just doing it in my head, I think it should be the 6th of December. Quick note for the audio listeners, it's actually the 4th of December. That's when we'll return for season 4. Because I believe that's 1 month gap from this episode till the start of the next season. So season 4 will start then. But there's lots of episodes that if you haven't seen them, please do check them out. Consider checking out the Patreon channel as well, because there's loads of amazing videos. Lots of the artists that we speak to have returned to give us a greater insight into their environment or their work in progress. And that's what we are also providing for people who support the Patreon channel, and everyone who's supporting the podcast that way. I really do appreciate it. It means the world to us. It keeps the podcast going. But just watching, liking, leaving a comment, all of this contributes. And I appreciate everyone watching, and I look forward to showing you what we have for the next season.
Yeah, and look forward to seeing you, Simon, as well in the next season.
You too. Thanks so much. Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.